He was just a tired single dad finishing the night shift and heading out for a quick run until a woman collapsed in front of him. No name, no warning. Just him, her, and a heartbeat slipping away. What happened next would ripple through both their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt, inspiring stories that celebrate kindness, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and it helps us keep sharing stories that truly matter. Now, let's begin. Single dad gave CPR to a collapsed jogger. She woke up and whispered, "I'm your new boss." The sky over Portland had just begun to pale, the morning still wrapped in a shroud of mist. Streetlights blinked against the retreating night and a soft drizzle clung to the air like breath on glass. Jake Miller adjusted the zipper on his hoodie, the fabric still warm from his overnight shift repairing elevator panels in one of Beacon Lux's older hotels. His feet ached, his back throbbed, but the run was non-negotiable. It was the only time he could outrun the ghosts. His daughter Sophie had been quiet that morning. She always was on Thursdays. That was the day her mother used to pack her lunch with little paper notes until the notes stopped. Until the woman who wrote them collapsed in their living room 3 years ago, blue-lipped and silent while Jake fumbled with 911 and did nothing else. He hadn't known how to save her. He never forgot that. Now, every Thursday after dropping Sophie at school, he ran. Not to stay in shape. Not really. It was a penance and maybe a prayer to become someone better. The path through Tanglewood Park wound like a sleepy serpent curling under trees just waking from autumn slumber. His feet thudded against damp pavement in rhythm, his breath sharp in his throat. Just ahead, a lone jogger, slender-billed ponytail swinging pace crisp. He registered her the way any tired man does distantly. Not important. Just another early riser. But then she faltered. At first it looked like a misstep, an ankle twist perhaps. She slowed, brought a hand to her ribs. Then she staggered sideways into the grass, knees buckling as if gravity had suddenly turned cruel. Her body folded limp. Jake stopped running. For a split second, everything froze. The air thickened. The scene mirrored another one, the color draining from a woman's face, fingers twitching, eyes wide with terror. Not again. He sprinted toward her. "Ma'am." "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, dropping to his knees beside her. No response. He touched her shoulder, then her neck cold. He turned her gently. Her skin was ashen, her lips tinged blue. He couldn't feel a pulse. His throat closed. Not again. Not again. Hands trembling, he yanked out his phone. No signal. Of course. This part of the park always dropped calls. He looked around. Empty paths. No joggers, no cyclists, no early dog walkers. His heart slammed in his chest. Think Jake. Do something. He tilted her chin, checked her airway. No obstruction. His brain called up the training videos he'd obsessed over after Marcy died. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Repeat. Focus. He placed his hands on her chest and began the compressions. 1, 2, 3. He counted aloud, trying to keep the tempo. Her ribs pushed back under his palms, then gave a little. He didn't stop. His breath came harder now, both from exertion and panic. "Come on," he murmured. "Don't you quit on me. Not today. 30 compressions." He leaned down, gave 2 breaths. Her chest rose faintly. Still nothing. He repeated the sequence. Again. By the 3rd round, his arms were shaking. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Please don't do this." A spasm. Then a gurgled inhale. Her body jerked beneath his hands. She coughed violently, eyes flying open with wild confusion. She gasped again, rolling slightly to her side. Jake fell back on his heels, his arms trembling with the rush of adrenaline. "You're okay," he panted. "You're okay. Just breathe." The woman blinked, vision blurry. Her chest heaved. She focused on him, sweat-soaked, breathing hard mud on his knees. Her lips moved, barely audible. what he asked, leaning closer. She coughed again, then whispered hoarse and strange, "I'm your new boss." Jake stared at her. "What?" But her eyes fluttered closed again, not unconscious this time, just drained, overwhelmed. Sirens echoed distantly through the park. Someone must have finally spotted them. He sat beside her, soaked in sweat, chilled to the bone, watching the woman he'd just pulled back from the edge of death. My new boss. No way. But even as doubt flickered through him, a cold certainty formed. There had been rumors about new management at Beacon Lux. A new CEO. Out of state. No one had seen her yet. And now, this woman with the sleek ponytail, the expensive runner's watch, and those commanding features, she didn't look like someone who got up at dawn to jog without reason. Jake's heart thudded again, but for an entirely different reason. Because if she really was the new boss, he just saved the life of the one person who had the power to change his own. And she didn't even know his name. Jake sat hunched at the kitchen table, the soft click of the wall clock echoing louder than it should. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting pale light across the scratched wooden surface. Sophie, 8 years old and always too observant, was coloring quietly across from him, her knees tucked under a hoodie 2 sizes too big. She hadn't said much since they got home from school. Thursdays were like that. Jake hated Thursdays. He watched her hand move slowly across the page, outlining a figure with wings and messy hair. "Is that an angel?" he asked softly. Sophie nodded, but didn't look up. "It's Mom," she said. Jake's throat closed. He reached for his mug. Cold coffee. He hadn't even realized he poured it. Sophie glanced up at him, then tilting her head in that way she did when she was working up the courage to ask something heavy. "If you had known CPR when Mom got sick, would she have lived?" Jake flinched like he'd been struck. He couldn't lie to her. Not Sophie. "I don't know, baby," he said, voice low. "Gravel thick? Maybe." She looked down again, nodding slowly. "But now you know it right." "Yeah," he said. "I do." She didn't speak again, but he saw it in her eyes, some quiet shift. A puzzle piece fitting into place. That's how Sophie processed grief, slowly inwardly, like a secret language no one else was allowed to hear. He didn't tell her what happened that morning in the park. Didn't tell her that the woman he saved might be the reason he didn't get the job transfer last week. Didn't tell her that when she opened her eyes and said, "I'm your new boss," his stomach had dropped not from fear, but from the strange collision of fate and irony. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Jake stood at the kitchen counter staring at the email still glowing on his phone. The subject line read, "Beacon Lux Staffing Decision. Application Status Update." He had read it 3 times already, but each word still felt like a slap. "Thank you for your interest. At this time, we have chosen a candidate whose qualifications better align with our current staffing needs." He scrolled down his thumb, brushing the screen like it could change something. He had applied to move to the daytime maintenance supervisor role. Better hours, benefits, no more late-night scrambling for childcare. Sophie could sleep normal hours. He could be a real dad again. But the rejection came 2 nights ago. And now, like some cosmic joke, he might have saved the life of the very person who signed off on that denial. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn Hart lay in a quiet hospital room, lit only by the soft glow of a monitor and the flicker of muted news from a wall-mounted television. She wasn't watching. Her mind was looping one moment over and over. The park, the blur of light, her chest burning, the weight on her ribs, the voice counting out compressions. And then those eyes, concerned, exhausted, familiar somehow, though she knew they had never met. A knock on the door broke her trance. Her assistant, Melanie, stepped in holding a manila folder and a to-go coffee tray. "You really should be resting," Melanie said, setting the coffee down. "But I figured you wouldn't." Evelyn gave a small smile. "You know me well." Melanie handed over the folder. "You asked for the top 10 maintenance staff profiles, starting with night crews, from Beacon Lux, Portland." Evelyn opened the folder and froze. There he was. Jacob Miller, current role overnight repair technician, part-time. Previous employment contractor. Education high school diploma, 1 technical certification. Application status. Denied for promotion. Insufficient supervisory experience. She stared at the profile photo. Same worn eyes, same heavy brow, a man who looked like he carried too much weight for 1 pair of shoulders. "This is him," she said quietly. Melanie frowned. "The guy who saved you?" Evelyn nodded. "Want me to flag him for HR?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet. I want to meet him again first. At work." Melanie hesitated. "You sure? That's a pretty big gesture." Evelyn leaned back, a strange ache in her ribs reminding her of how close she'd come to not being here. "I'm not sure of anything right now," she said, "except that I owe that man my life, and that maybe I was wrong about more than just 1 file." Back at Jake's apartment, he stood at the small window overlooking the dim parking lot, watching the flicker of rain under a lone street lamp. A half-done drawing of Sophie and her mom was taped to the fridge behind him. In the photo next to it, Jake's wife, Marcy, was laughing, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He touched the edge of the picture with calloused fingers. "I did better today," he whispered. He didn't know what would come of it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But he knew one thing. When the woman he saved opened her eyes and looked at him like he mattered, like he wasn't invisible, a small part of him, long dormant, had stirred awake. Hope. Real, trembling hope. And that was something he hadn't felt in years. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was oddly soothing. Evelyn Hart lay still, her eyes half closed against the afternoon light creeping in through the hospital blinds. She hated hospitals, always had. The sterile smell, the way time folded into itself inside the walls like the world outside, had paused, but no one told you. But today she didn't mind it as much, because she was alive. And that was something she hadn't taken for granted. Until yesterday. Her ribs still ached with every breath. CPR did that, apparently. She'd read it in textbooks, heard it in staff briefings, but it was different. Feeling the echo of someone's desperate effort pressing life back into your chest. Real. Human. She remembered the man's face vividly now. Strong jaw, concerned eyes, a sweat-streaked brow. Not a stranger in the moment, but something more, something familiar, almost grounding. A knock tapped softly on the door. "Come in," she said. Melanie entered, heels clicking softly against the tile, carrying 2 things, a sleek laptop and a small paper bag that smelled like real food. Smuggled in a sandwich. Turkey and Havarti. "They've got you on enough IV fluids to drown a person." Evelyn smiled faintly. "You always know what matters." Melanie perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. "Doctor says you're doing better than expected. Might be out of here tomorrow." Evelyn nodded absently, gaze already shifting to the laptop as Melanie opened it and turned the screen toward her. "You asked for the staffing shortlist. Night crew applicants. This is everyone who's applied for permanent daytime roles in the last 30 days. Evelyn clicked through the files, slowly scanning familiar formats, name, photo, position, status, rejection notes. Then she stopped. Jacob Miller. She didn't need to read the rest right away. One glance at the grainy badge photo and she knew. It was him, the man who'd knelt beside her, who'd saved her life. Her breath caught not from pain but from the collision of gratitude and disbelief. She read the file again, this time slowly. Part-time overnight maintenance technician, high reliability scores, single parent status noted in HR remarks, recent application to daytime supervisory position denied, reason limited formal education, no direct management experience. "Was this signed off last week?" she asked. Melanie nodded. "By interim leadership. Before you arrived." Evelyn stared at the rejection note. Cold, clinical. She'd seen 1,000 like it. She'd even written many herself. Efficiency, metrics, structure, all the polished words that kept companies moving. But none of those words had been gasping for air in a field yesterday. None of them had held her life in shaking hands and refused to let go. She leaned back, closing her eyes. I don't want anyone to reach out to him. Not yet. Melanie frowned. You sure you don't think it would mean something? I want to see him in his own world. First, Evelyn interrupted gently, where he doesn't feel like someone's watching. I want to understand how I didn't see him before, how we miss people like him. Melanie gave a reluctant nod and stood. Well, you'll have a chance soon. Your first full site visit scheduled for Beacon Lux Portland this Friday. Ground inspection, staff meet and greet. Evelyn arched a brow. That fast? You insisted on transparency and leadership on the floor, remember? Melanie smirked. You wrote the playbook. Evelyn smiled faintly. I did, didn't I? But the smile faded as Melanie left and the door clicked shut behind her. The room was quiet again, and Evelyn sat in that silence not as a CEO but as a woman who'd nearly died, and had been brought back not by power, not by policy, but by compassion. Across town, Jake stood inside the supply closet of the Beacon Lux Hotel checking a clipboard with smudged fingerprints and ink circles around half the entries. His hands were still scraped from the morning's ductwork job. One of the air handler units on the rooftop had blown out, and the elevator control panel on the east wing kept blinking fault for no apparent reason. It was a standard Thursday, tired, thankless, necessary. He took a sip of cold coffee from a thermos that had seen better days, then headed toward the elevator shaft toolbox swinging from one hand. The hallway was pristine polished marble floors, minimalist art pieces, LED sconces humming gently. Everything about the hotel screamed intentional luxury, except maybe the maintenance guy with oil on his collar. Jake crouched by the panel, his mind drifting. I'm your new boss. The words had rung in his ears since the park. He hadn't told anyone. Not even Miguel, the only coworker who didn't pretend Jake didn't exist. Part of him wasn't sure it had really happened, and part of him feared that if she remembered him, it might not change anything. He wasn't a resume standout. No college degree, no fancy credentials. Just a guy who showed up, fixed things, and clocked out. Who went home to a daughter and tried to make her believe the world was still good. He'd applied for the daytime shift not because he wanted to climb, but because he needed to be present for Sophie. School pickups, homework help, a decent bedtime. He didn't want to chase prestige. He just wanted to be there when she needed him. But Beacon Lux didn't care about bedtime stories. Jake sighed, closing the panel and tightening the last screw. As he stood up, he didn't notice the elevator doors down the hall slide open, or the tall woman stepping out flanked by her assistant and two mid-level managers in suits. Evelyn Hart stopped mid-step when she saw him, her heart catching in her chest. He looked just like he had that morning, tired, focused, unaware of anyone watching. Only now the fluorescent hallway lights flickered off his shoulders like armor. Melanie whispered, "That's him." Right. Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to, because something had shifted inside her, something unspoken and profound. And for the first time in years she felt the sting of humility, the realization that sometimes the people who carry the most weight are the easiest to overlook. She stepped forward, but not to speak yet. She wanted to see him, really see him first. And when the moment was right, she'd make sure he knew. She remembered everything. The Beacon Lux lobby was a masterpiece of understatement. Clean lines, warm wood accents, and soft jazz floating through the air like invisible perfume. Guests with designer luggage glided across polished floors while staff offered practice smiles, never breaking rhythm. Jake didn't belong here. Not really. He stepped out of the service hallway with a mop handle in one hand and a wrench sticking from his back pocket, sweat clinging to his temples. The suit-clad guests didn't even glance his way. That was the job stay invisible fix things before anyone notices they're broken. "Hey, Miller," a voice called. Jake turned. It was Russell Hines, operations manager. Late 40s, gelled hair smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jake straightened slightly. Morning. Russell looked him over. Air handler on 5 still giving us trouble. Should be back online within the hour. Russell nodded slowly. That's good. Try not to use the guest elevators in the meantime. We've got corporate upstairs. Jake gave a clipped nod. Understood. Russell lingered, eyes sharp. Big visit today. New leadership wants to shake hands with the staff. Word is the new CEO might actually step foot into the boiler room. Imagine that. There was a faint smirk on his lips as he turned and walked away, but Jake didn't take the bait. He'd been around long enough to know how this worked. Upper management made appearances, handed out lukewarm praise, and disappeared behind mirrored doors again. He didn't expect anything different. Still, as he headed back into the staff corridor, something buzzed low in his gut like a wire humming before it sparked. Evelyn walked the hallways of the hotel slowly, her heels muffled against plush carpet. Every wall, every corner spoke of design decisions she had once signed off from 1,000 miles away. Now it felt foreign. She stopped outside the maintenance wing, flanked by Melanie and Russell. "I want to see where the repair staff works," Evelyn said. Russell hesitated, then forced a smile. "Of course, just keep in mind, ma'am, it's not exactly guest-facing." "Neither are heart valves," Evelyn replied. "Still pretty critical." Melanie gave a small stifled chuckle. Russell cleared his throat and opened the door. The hallway changed instantly. Gone were the soft lights and scented air. The tile here was utilitarian, the air laced with machine oil and faint traces of bleach. But it was honest, grounded. They passed a narrow office space where 2 techs hunched over schematics. Further down, a half-open door revealed a man in coveralls bent over an electrical panel. Evelyn's steps slowed. It was Jake. He didn't see her yet. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms streaked with grime, a pencil tucked behind his ear. There was a rhythm to the way he worked, focused, methodical. The kind of precision that didn't come from degrees but from years of repetition failure adjustment. "Leave us," Evelyn said quietly. Russell blinked. "Excuse me, I'd like to speak with him alone." Russell hesitated, then gave a tight nod and motioned for Melanie to follow. "Of course." When the hallway cleared, Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't say his name, just waited. Jake felt the presence before he heard it. He turned startled, expecting a guest who'd wandered into the wrong hallway. Instead, he froze. It was her. Hair swept back. A tailored blazer. Those same eyes, clear, intelligent, and now fixed directly on him. "You," he breathed, barely audible. Evelyn gave a soft smile. "Me?" Jake wiped his hands on his pants, suddenly too aware of the dirt, the sweat, the cheap thermos perched beside the panel. I didn't know if you remembered," she offered. He nodded. "I do," she said gently. "All of it." Silence pressed between them for a moment. Then Evelyn took a step closer. "I read your file," she said. "Saw your application. Your rejection." Jake's jaw tensed. "It's fine. I wasn't qualified." "That's not the word I'd use." "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied, quickly uneasy. "I didn't do what I did because of your title. I didn't even know who you were." "I know," she said softly. "That's exactly why it matters." Jake shifted his weight. "Look, I'm just trying to do my job. That's all." "Is it?" Evelyn asked, tilting her head. "Because from where I'm standing, you did more than a job. You saved a life. Mine. And then you walked away like it didn't mean anything." Jake's eyes dropped to the floor. It meant something, he said quietly. It meant everything. "But I'm not looking for a favor." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Neither am I. I'm looking for people who make this place work. And I've realized we've built a system that rewards polish over substance, titles over integrity. That needs to change." Jake met her gaze then, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, the spark of something unspoken. "I want to know more about what you do here," she said. "The real work. Show me." Jake hesitated. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said, then winced. Okay, maybe wrong phrasing. But yes. He cracked a reluctant smile, the first real one she'd seen on his face. Well, he said, grabbing the thermos. First thing you should know. Nothing in this building is ever actually fixed. We're just always buying time. I can work with that, Evelyn replied. As they disappeared down the hallway together, the stark divide between suits and overalls boardroom and boiler room began quietly to dissolve. And for the first time, both of them felt it. Something was changing. Not just policies, not just job titles, but something deeper. And it had started with an act of kindness neither of them saw coming. The hallways of Beacon Lux shimmered with quiet opulence. Golden sconces lined the walls like sentinels of elegance, their glow warm and intentional, just enough to make every guest feel like the star of their own story. But down a service corridor behind the East Wing ballroom, a flickering light bulb interrupted the illusion. It buzzed every few seconds, struggling against its own obsolescence. Jake stood beneath it on a metal stepladder, wrench in hand, shoulders tense from holding the same position for 20 minutes. His phone buzzed again on the floor next to him, and this time he cursed under his breath. He climbed down, checked the screen. Voicemail from the school. Again. Jake tapped the message and pressed the phone to his ear. Sophie's principal, calm and professional as always, informed him that his daughter had been held past dismissal due to a substitute bus driver mix-up. She was safe and waiting in the main office. Jake glanced at his watch. Already an hour past school end. He squeezed his eyes shut. It had been his biggest fear when applying for the day shift that he wouldn't be able to balance everything. And now, here he was running on caffeine and adrenaline, trying to keep elevators from shorting out while his daughter sat alone under fluorescent lights waiting for a ride that never came. He grabbed his bag and hurried toward the maintenance office where Miguel, his only real friend at work, sat eating chips straight from the bag. "Cover for me," Jake said, breathless. 15 minutes. Miguel looked up. "Kid, trouble." Jake nodded. Miguel didn't hesitate. "Go." Sophie sat curled in a too-big chair backpack at her feet, hugging a well-loved stuffed rabbit. She looked up when Jake rushed in, breath caught in his chest. "Hey, bug," he said softly. She didn't cry, didn't pout, just gave a small smile and reached for his hand. "Sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to stay so long." Jake knelt in front of her, brushing her hair back. "It's not your fault. I should have been there." She looked at him solemn. "You work really hard." The words hit harder than he expected. "I do," he said. "But I'm trying to fix that." Later that evening, Sophie sat cross-legged on a pile of old blankets inside the Beacon Lux basement utility room. She sipped cocoa from a styrofoam cup while drawing dinosaurs on the back of a discarded service log. Jake had managed to coax a space heater into life near the wall, and the faint hum filled the silence. He watched her from a distance while checking a faulty water pressure valve. Bringing her here hadn't been the plan, but childcare was thin, and she didn't want to go to the neighbors again. So he did what parents do when the world doesn't bend. He made space where there was none. A knock startled him. He turned and froze. Evelyn stood in the doorway holding a folder and a to-go bag. Her heels clicked softly on the tile as she stepped inside. "I brought the revised shift proposal," she began, then stopped, noticing Sophie. Jake moved quickly, blocking her view. "Sorry, she's just here for a little bit. Won't be a distraction." Evelyn peered around him. "Is this—" Jake stiffened. "Yes, she's beautiful," Evelyn said, smiling gently. "Hi there." Sophie looked up, blinking. "Hi." Evelyn lowered herself to Sophie's level, mindful of her heels. "I like your rabbit." Sophie offered it up. "His name's Captain Crumbs." Evelyn chuckled. "That's a strong name. I bet he's brave." "He's very quiet," Sophie said. "Well, quiet people can still be strong." Jake stood awkwardly, unsure how to bridge the moment. "She won't be here long." "I just needed to Jake," Evelyn said, rising. "I'm not here to reprimand you." He nodded slowly. She handed him the folder. "This is the modified position outline. A hybrid role, split shifts, flexible clock-ins. Based on your feedback. Jake looked down at it, heart-thudding. You'd let me make my own hours. Within reason, she replied. So long as the work gets done, and I've seen enough to trust that it will. Jake stared at the pages, stunned. This doesn't usually happen, he said. I know, Evelyn replied, but it should. They stood in silence a beat longer than needed. Then Sophie called out, Dad, the light. Over there's flickering. Jake sighed. It's probably the ballast again. I'll fix it. Evelyn looked toward the corner. Do you mind if I help? Jake blinked. You want to fix a light? She shrugged. You said you wanted me to see the real work. He grabbed another step stool and handed her a pair of safety glasses. You ever used a screwdriver before I've managed a boardroom? How hard can this be? Minutes later, she stood on the stool, awkwardly holding the casing while Jake pointed at a wire. That's your ground. Don't touch that. Got it. Sophie watched them from her blanket fort, smiling. Are you guys friends now? She asked innocently. Evelyn looked down at Jake, then at Sophie. I hope so, she said. Jake didn't reply. But for the first time in a long time, something inside him loosened. Not just respect, but warmth. Connection. And under the hum of wires and the glow of repaired light, something began to shift, not just in the building, but in the space between them. Something quietly beautiful. Something like trust. The next morning, Evelyn sat at the head of a long oak conference table surrounded by the department heads of Beacon Lux. The room was all glass and angles perched on the top floor like a throne above the city. From here you could see bridges stretching across the river rooftops wrapped in morning fog. But Evelyn wasn't looking at the view. She was watching Russell Hines, who stood confidently at the far end, laser pointer in hand, presenting his weekly performance charts like a trial lawyer before a jury. And as you can see, Russell said, clicking to the next slide, maintenance response time dropped by 8% this quarter. We're below benchmark for 3 of our 4 sites. That trend reflects the inconsistency we see when underqualified staff are promoted into roles they're not equipped to handle. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She could feel where this was going. The tone. The implication. Russell clicked again. Now, I understand the push for internal development, but I want to caution against allowing sentiment to override standards. We've got policies in place for a reason. Evelyn steepled her fingers, her voice calm. Are you referring to a specific promotion? Mr. Hines Russell didn't flinch. I'm referring to the conversation about reclassifying part-time staff into supervisory hybrid roles. We need consistency, proven credentials, experience. Silence settled. Then Evelyn replied, steady and deliberate. I agree, Russell. We do need consistency, which is exactly why we need to reassess what qualifies as proven. She leaned forward. You know what else dropped in that same quarter, she asked? Guest complaints related to repair issues. Because even while working overtime understaffed and without benefits, our night techs have been keeping this building from falling apart. Russell blinked. Yes, but that's not the same as... It's not the same, she interrupted. It's more. It's hands-on problem-solving, emotional regulation in high-stress conditions, and... She paused, voice tightening slightly, the presence of mind to respond to emergency medical situations when no one else does. A few heads turned. Melanie, seated quietly beside her, gave a slow, approving nod. Russell cleared his throat. I just think we should be careful about setting precedents. Evelyn smiled razor-sharp. That's exactly what I intend to do. Set a new precedent. An hour later, Jake walked through the service corridor, toolbox in hand, completely unaware of the storm that had just rolled through the executive suite. He'd barely slept. His mind had been reeling all night about Evelyn offering him flexibility, about Sophie being forced to spend her evenings in utility rooms, about how the woman he'd once saved was now choosing to show up, again and again, not just as a boss, but as something else. A knock startled him as he reached his station. It was Russell, clipboard clutched tightly. "Got a job for you," Russell said, voice clipped. A pipe burst in the VIP suite. Jake frowned. "Upstairs, you heard me." Russell held out the order. "You'll be shadowed." Jake hesitated. Shadowed new policy. Russell said, not hiding his smirk. "Evaluation rounds. Gotta make sure our more unconventional hires are up to company standard." Jake took the form jaw clenched. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't about evaluation. It was about intimidation. The VIP suite was quiet when Jake arrived, high ceiling, soft, ambient lighting, and imported tile that looked like it cost more than his truck. The leak was behind the guest bathroom wall. He got to work silently aware of the figure watching from the doorway. Evelyn. She hadn't announced herself, but he knew it was her. He didn't turn, just kept tightening the valve. "You always this quiet when you work?" she asked. Jake exhaled. "Only when someone's trying to decide if I'm worth the risk." There was a pause. Then, "You're not a risk to me, Jake. You're a reminder." He turned finally. Of what she stepped into the room. No clipboard, no pretense. That everything I was taught to value degrees, suits, polish, none of it brought me back when I collapsed in that park. Her voice softened, but a man in a hoodie with scraped hands did. Jake looked away. "I'm not some hero, Evelyn. I was scared out of my mind. I almost didn't even know what to do." "But you did," she said. "That's the point." He stared at her, then something unspoken passing between them again, fragile as thread. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people from different worlds meeting on a bridge of shared imperfection. Evelyn stepped closer. "Tell me what you'd change," she said. Jake blinked. "What in this place? If you had the chance. Don't filter. Don't defer. Just say it." Jake hesitated, then shrugged. "I'd stop treating maintenance like background noise. Give people full-time status if they're showing up like it. Pay for certification classes. Get rid of the culture where the guys with tools feel like they have to disappear when executives walk in." Evelyn's eyes didn't leave his. Noted. And she meant it. That night, Evelyn returned to her hotel suite. She stood at the window staring down at the quiet hum of the city. She thought of her first year in business school, how she was taught to lead with numbers, never feelings. Yet none of those metrics had saved her that morning in the park. A pair of rough hands had. She poured a glass of water, sat on the couch, and pulled out Jake's original application. It didn't list Ivy League schools or elite internships, but it had notes in the margin from HR, always punctual, never complains, works overtime when others refuse, polite, doesn't escalate conflicts. In short, the kind of employee who holds the whole place together quietly. Evelyn circled one line with her pen, then wrote 2 words in the margin beside it, rescue-worthy. Only this time she was the one preparing to do the saving, not just of Jake's career, but of a system that had forgotten how to see the people holding it up. Jake stood at the kitchen counter, shoulders hunched, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The apartment was still. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch with her sketch pad resting on her chest, her bunny tucked beneath her arm like a little talisman of safety. The television murmured quietly in the background, casting a gentle blue glow across the worn carpet. His eyes were fixed on the envelope in his hand. It wasn't bulky, just a few sheets of paper inside, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Earlier that afternoon, Evelyn had slipped it to him after his shift ended. No grand announcement, no audience, just her and Jake standing in the alley behind the hotel where delivery trucks rumbled past and pigeons fought over breadcrumbs. "This is yours," she'd said simply. "Read it when you're ready." Now he wasn't sure he'd ever be. Jake peeled the flap back slowly, breath held. He unfolded the documents, a formal offer of employment, full-time salaried hybrid hours, health benefits, paid training for additional certifications, and the title Senior Facilities Supervisor. He blinked at the words. It didn't feel real, until he reached the end and saw her signature, Evelyn Hart, CEO, written in her sharp, deliberate hand. The mug slipped from his fingers and hit the sink with a thud. He rubbed his temples, overwhelmed by 1,000 tangled thoughts. This was everything he'd asked for, everything Sophie needed, a life raft in the middle of a sea he'd been treading for too long. So why was he hesitating? At dawn, he walked Sophie to school. She skipped alongside him, swinging her lunchbox, humming something from a cartoon he didn't recognize. The morning air was crisp-touched with the smell of wet leaves and coffee from the corner cart. "Dad," she asked halfway to the gate, "do you think I could ever be a boss like that lady with the nice shoes?" Jake smiled despite himself. "You mean Evelyn?" Sophie nodded. "She's really pretty. And she listens." Jake stopped walking. He looked down at his daughter, bright-eyed, hopeful, sharp as ever. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She does." Sophie tilted her head. "Are you gonna say yes?" Jake hesitated. To what he asked, testing her. "The new job. The one that lets you come to my class play. You keep thinking about it like your eyebrows are broken." Jake laughed, covering his mouth. "Yeah, I guess I do that." Sophie stepped closer and took his hand. "You don't have to be scared, Dad. You already saved her life. That's way harder than paperwork." He looked at her, his heart twisting. And that's when he realized what the fear really was, not about failing the job or stepping into something new. It was about being seen. Truly seen. Not just as a worker in the background, but as a man who mattered. A father trying his best. A person worthy of investment. That kind of visibility was exhilarating and terrifying. Later that day, Jake returned to Beacon Luck's contract in hand throat tight. He passed the lobby with its marble and gold past the concierge, who finally nodded at him like he was more than just the maintenance guy, and headed toward the executive floor somewhere he'd never been, not once in all his years of working here. Evelyn's office was sleek modern. Glass walls, a low couch in the corner, a single-framed photo on her desk, her and a younger brother both in hiking boots grinning at the summit of some forgotten mountain. She stood when he entered. "I read it," Jake said, holding the contract. She didn't speak. Just waited. He exhaled. "I want to say yes. I do. But I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Why me?" The question hung in the air. Evelyn crossed her arms, her voice soft but unwavering. "Because you've been doing more than your job for a long time and no one bothered to notice. Because you think like a leader, but carry yourself like a servant. Because when everything went wrong, your instinct was to act, not to ask who was watching." She paused. "And because Sophie deserves to see that people like her father are worth betting on." Jake swallowed hard. "That's a good answer," he said, voice thick. "Then let me ask you something," Evelyn said gently. "Why are you still afraid?" He looked down, flexing his fingers. "Because if I mess this up, it's not just me who falls." Evelyn stepped forward, reaching for the contract. "Then we build it so you don't have to carry the whole weight alone." Their eyes met. And in that moment, Jake realized that the offer she'd made wasn't just about a promotion or a paycheck. It was about trust. She was offering him a place in the story, not as a background character, but as someone who could help rewrite it. He took the pen she handed him and signed his name. That night at home, he found Sophie drawing again. This time it was a hotel with a rainbow over it and 3 little stick figures beneath. One tall with a toolbox, one medium with heels, one small with a rabbit. Jake knelt beside her. "What's this one?" Sophie beamed. "That's you. That's the lady boss. And that's me. We all work at the hotel now." He stared at the page, warmth blooming in his chest like a light finally flicked on. "You know what he said? What I think that's my favorite picture yet." And for the first time in a very long time, Jake Miller felt like maybe he was exactly where he was meant to be. The clanging of metal pipes echoed through the basement hallway like distant thunder. Jake bent over a faulty valve, tightening a rusted coupling while sweat dripped from his brow. It was barely 10 a.m., and the new role, only 3 days old, already felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too big. He'd been promoted. He had a title now. But most days it still felt like he was pretending, navigating meetings, juggling repairs, answering emails filled with acronyms he hadn't seen since high school. And today, things had gone wrong. Very wrong. He heard the elevator ding above him and knew without checking Russell had arrived. Jake cursed under his breath, wiped his hands on his jeans, and straightened just as the man himself strode into the mechanical room, expression smug and tight-lipped. Senior Facilities Supervisor Russell greeted voice-dripping sarcasm. "Nice title. Shame about the blacked-out East Wing." Jake flinched. "I'm working on it." "Are you?" Russell gestured sharply behind him. "Because half of our VIP guests just filed service complaints. Lights flickering, room temperatures fluctuating. That's not minor." Jake tried to keep his voice level. "It's a cascade fault. The building's wiring is outdated. If you want the full solution, we need to replace the relay junctions, not just patch them." "Ah," Russell smirked. "So the solution is spending thousands of dollars and weeks of downtime." Sounds like someone's angling to make excuses instead of taking responsibility. Jake's jaw tightened. "I'm not making excuses. I've logged every work order, and I've stayed overtime every night this week." Russell stepped closer. "Let me tell you what I see: someone who got bumped up because the CEO got sentimental, and now the system's cracking, just like I warned." Jake's hands clenched at his sides. His chest burned not just from anger but from the weight of every invisible pressure pressing down on him. Sophie's school tuition, the car's failing transmission, the look in Evelyn's eyes when she handed him that contract. "I'm doing everything I can," Jake said through gritted teeth. "Maybe everything you can just isn't enough," Russell shot back. For a beat, silence pulsed between them. Then Jake turned, walked past him and out into the hallway. He needed air. Real air. Not fluorescent lights and recycled HVAC frustration. He passed the lobby without looking at anyone, stepped out into the alley behind the building, and braced his hands on his knees. His mind spiraled. Maybe Russell's right. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe this job was meant for someone with a degree, a resume, a polished suit, and the right vocabulary. Then he remembered Sophie's words. "You already saved her life. That's way harder than paperwork." But in this moment, it didn't feel like enough. Back upstairs, Evelyn scrolled through her inbox when Melanie rushed in. "There's an issue," she said, serious. What kind of issue? Russell cornered Jake downstairs. Words spreading staff are talking. Apparently, Russell implied Jake's promotion was a favor. Morale's shaking. Evelyn stood, fury tightening behind her ribs. "Where's Jake now?" "He left the floor. No one's seen him for 20 minutes. Evelyn grabbed her coat. "Clear, my next 2 hours." She found him near the loading dock, sitting on an overturned bucket behind a stack of cleaning supplies. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes on the pavement. She didn't speak right away, just stepped into the quiet with him. Finally, he looked up. "Should have known better than to think I could carry this." "You're not supposed to carry it alone," she said. He let out a bitter chuckle. "That's easy to say from your chair." Evelyn sat beside him, ignoring the dust and cold. "You think I haven't been called names behind my back? That I didn't hear people whisper that I only got this job because my father was a real estate legend?" Jake turned to her, surprised. "My first month on the job," she continued, "one of my regional VPs introduced me at a meeting and said, 'This is our new CEO. Don't worry, she looks young, but she's got bite.'" Everyone laughed. I didn't. Jake's gaze dropped. "What did you do?" "I rewrote every policy they use to keep quiet employees buried. Then I promoted the night shift janitor to daytime floor supervisor after I saw him de-escalate a panicked guest better than 3 managers combined." Jake snorted. "That sounds familiar." Evelyn smiled. "Jake, you didn't get this job because I owed you. You got it because you earned it. And yes, Russell's pushing back. He's scared. Of what? of the fact that someone like you who leads with integrity and action challenges everything people like him hide behind. Jake stared ahead, brow furrowed. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had HR pull the maintenance logs. Do you know how many issues you resolved last week? He shrugged. 17. Personally, including 3, no one else noticed. Jake blinked. You didn't fail today. You exposed a weakness the system's been ignoring for years. And if you'll walk back in there with me, I'll make sure everyone knows that. He looked at her, something softening behind his eyes. I don't want to fight. This isn't a fight, she said. It's a shift. That afternoon, Evelyn called an all-staff meeting, something rarely done midweek. Employees filled the break room, curious, uneasy. Russell stood in the back, arms crossed. Jake stood near the door, unsure whether to step forward. Evelyn didn't wait. I want to address the electrical outage, she said, and I want to thank the man who identified a decades-old systems flaw and prevented a larger failure. She turned to Jake. Jake Miller didn't cause a breakdown. He caught one. And, starting next quarter, he'll lead a facilities modernization team to rebuild what should have been replaced years ago. Gasps, murmurs, then applause. Jake flushed, stunned. Melanie beamed. Russell turned pale. Evelyn met Jake's eyes as the room applauded louder. And for the first time since that morning in the park, he didn't feel like a man who'd merely survived something. He felt like someone who had changed something. The apartment was quiet that night. Not tired quiet or end-of-day quiet, but the kind that lingers after something big happens. A stillness wrapped in reflection. Jake sat on the couch, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the top button left open like a small rebellion against everything he'd carried all day. Sophie lay curled beside him, her head on his shoulder, a bedtime story resting forgotten in her lap. Outside the window, rain tapped gently against the glass, the city humming its lullaby of passing cars and distant voices. I heard you clapped today, Sophie said softly. Jake looked down, smiling. You heard Mr. Miguel texted me. Said you saved the building. Jake chuckled. That's a bit dramatic. Sophie tilted her head. But you fixed something important. I pointed out something broken. That's all. That's kind of the same. He paused. It wasn't about the lights or the outage. It was about the silence, the quiet neglect that came from years of looking at problems and thinking, that's just the way it is. Jake had always fixed what he could reach. But now, for the first time, he had the tools and the authority to fix what others had chosen to ignore. Sophie stirred beside him, then sat up, cross-legged, her face serious in the dim light. Can I ask you something? Of course. She toyed with the edge of her sleeve. Do you ever wish you hadn't helped that lady in the park? The question caught him off guard. He blinked. What I mean? Sophie hesitated, struggling to shape the thought. If you didn't help her, maybe none of this would have happened. You wouldn't be so busy now. You wouldn't be working late or getting in trouble with mean guys like Mr. Russell. You wouldn't be so tired. Jake stared at her, then gently reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Sophie, he said, I've never not for 1 second regretted helping her. But what if everything gets too hard, she asked. What if people don't like you being the boss? What if it all goes back to how it was before? Jake thought for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, speaking with the kind of quiet certainty only a father can manage. If I hadn't helped her, he said, I might have kept my head down forever. I might have told myself I didn't matter, that showing up was enough. But that moment, it reminded me that doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, still changes the world. Sophie looked at him with wide eyes. Even if the world's really big? He smiled. Especially then. They sat like that for a while, her head resting on his chest again, his hand gently stroking her hair. The TV flickered in silence, a paused screensaver casting soft colors on the walls. Eventually she murmured, I think she was meant to fall near you, Dad. He swallowed against the lump in his throat. Maybe I was meant to be there for her. The next morning, Jake arrived early, too early, even for a maintenance supervisor. The lobby was still waking up, lights flickering on one by one, front desk yawning behind smiles, fresh flowers arriving from the delivery truck. He walked the halls slowly, not with the anxiety of a man out of place, but the steady gaze of someone who finally owned his purpose. Evelyn was already in her office reviewing project timelines for the facility's modernization task force. She looked up as he knocked on the glass wall. "You're early," she said, standing. "Couldn't sleep." She gestured for him to come in. Jake sat, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "This is a blueprint I drew up last night. Just ideas for emergency protocols. Clearer signage in the stairwells, maybe some bilingual notices. I figured if we're going to do this right, we should start from the ground up." Evelyn studied the sketch. Hand-drawn, neat block letters, little notes in the margins. Thoughtful. Real. "I like it," she said. "It's human. Practical." Jake shrugged. "That's how I think." "Don't change that," she said softly. "I've sat through enough presentations with buzzwords and pivot strategies. I'd rather work with someone who understands what it's like when a wire fails at midnight." Jake smiled faintly. "Appreciate that." They were quiet for a moment. Then Evelyn leaned against her desk. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "You helped me when I was vulnerable. Not because you wanted anything, but because it was right." He nodded slowly. "Well, now it's my turn to help you do the same for others," she said. "This modernization plan. It's not just wires and panels. It's dignity, and I want you to lead it." Jake blinked. "You want me to form a team, train them, work with HR, build a new standard for how this place treats the people who keep it running." He stared at her, heart thudding. "And if I mess up?" he asked, voice raw. Evelyn smiled. "Then we fix it, like everything else." That afternoon, Jake passed Russell in the hallway. The man looked away first. He didn't smirk, didn't speak. Jake didn't need him to. He had something better than approval. He had a daughter who believed in him, a boss who backed him, a job that reflected the man he'd become. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a janitor patching leaks in the dark. He felt like a builder, of systems, of second chances, of something that might finally last. The staff lounge buzzed with low conversation as Jake stepped inside, holding a folder thick with schematics and hand-drawn notes. A whiteboard behind him listed tasks for the week, some scribbled in sharp black marker, others already crossed out. The room was busier than usual, the air charged with something between curiosity and hope. A few weeks ago, no one would have expected the hotel's facilities staff to be gathering for anything more than coffee and quick instructions. Today, they had a meeting with the CEO. Evelyn Hart stood by the far window, coffee in hand sleeves rolled up. No blazer, no assistant shadowing her, no pretense. She looked comfortable, present. Miguel leaned toward Jake. "You sure she's serious about all this?" Jake offered a half smile. "You've met her, haven't you?" Miguel chuckled. "Good point." Evelyn turned, signaling for the room's attention. The hum quieted instantly. "Thanks for showing up," she began. "I know it's not every day corporate invites you to speak freely, and I know it's not always easy to believe when leadership says, 'We're listening.' But I'm here to tell you, we are." She paused, glancing around the room. "We've been running this hotel on outdated equipment and outdated thinking. Both need to change. So today isn't about presentations, it's about perspective. I want to hear what's really happening behind the walls, what you need, what's broken." For a beat, no one spoke. Then one hand rose. It was Carla, an HVAC tech who'd worked there for 9 years. Her voice was firm. "We need tools that aren't 20 years old. We spend half our time trying to fix our equipment just so we can start fixing the real problems." Another tech chimed in. "We've been patching insulation with duct tape." Someone else. "The supply room leaks every time it rains." Evelyn nodded, jotting things down on a notepad. She didn't interrupt. She didn't deflect. She absorbed. Jake watched from the back, his chest swelling not just with pride, but with something deeper validation. This is how it should be, he thought. This is how dignity starts by listening. Then Evelyn turned to Jake. "Jake," she said, "you've been here the longest. You've seen this place at its worst. What would you change if you had no restrictions?" Jake stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I'd build a culture where no one feels invisible," he said, "where maintenance isn't treated like a background process but part of the experience. Guests don't see us, but they feel what we do. Every light that works, every door that opens, every emergency that doesn't happen, that's because of this team. We deserve to be more than a line item on a spreadsheet." The room went quiet. Evelyn's eyes shimmered, but she blinked it back and smiled. That's the kind of answer that rewrites handbooks. She stepped forward and pulled a folded sheet from her pocket. "This," she said, "is a signed executive order. Starting next quarter, we're increasing our facilities budget by 40%. We're implementing paid training for certification, scheduling quarterly wellness reviews, and restructuring internal promotion pathways, so you don't need a business degree to move up, you just need integrity and proof of impact." A gasp rippled through the room. But Evelyn wasn't done. "And we're retiring the old staff evaluation format, replacing it with something we'll co-design with your input. Because who better to shape how success is measured than the ones delivering it?" For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped, then another, and then the room erupted applause, echoing against the walls like thunder. Not polite, not obligatory, but earned. Jake looked at Evelyn. And that's when he saw it. A single tear. She turned slightly, brushing it away as if it didn't belong. But it did. And Jake knew it wasn't just the moment getting to her, it was the journey. From collapse to transformation. From being saved to leading with intention. After the meeting, as the room slowly emptied, Evelyn stepped outside for air. Jake followed. They stood side by side overlooking the small courtyard beyond the loading dock. Light rain sprinkled the bricks. "You cried in there," Jake said gently. Evelyn didn't deny it. "I did." Jake looked at her sideways. "Didn't think CEOs were allowed to do that." Evelyn chuckled. "They're not. But I stopped caring about aloud the day a man with grease on his face knelt in the mud and brought me back to life." They were quiet for a long moment. Then Evelyn turned to him, voice soft. "You know, that day when I woke up in the park, I didn't remember my title, or the company, or what flight I'd missed. I just remembered the sound of your voice counting, willing me back. That's what stayed." Jake didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing he could. "I'm glad you stayed." She met his eyes, the air between them humming with something unspoken. Not romance, not yet, but something that looked a lot like trust. A future forming not out of convenience but of respect and shared ground. "I meant what I said," she added, her voice stronger now. "You didn't just catch a failing wire that day, you caught me, and now I want to help build something that catches others before they fall." Jake nodded, the weight in his chest finally easing. "Then let's build it." And just like that, with rain falling softly around them and the echoes of applause still lingering in the walls, two people who had once been strangers, separated by job titles, social expectations, and sheer chance, began to walk forward as equals. Not because of contracts, not because of obligation, but because sometimes the right people meet in the most unexpected ways and refuse to let go. It was just past sunrise when Jake and Sophie arrived at Tanglewood Park. The same park, the one with the winding trail, the old sycamores. The quiet spot where months ago a jogger collapsed and a single act of instinct had changed the course of not just one life, but two. Now the path was washed in golden light. Autumn leaves fluttered across the ground like blessings scattered by the wind. Jake held a thermos of coffee in one hand, Sophie's hand in the other. She wore her favorite blue coat and a paper crown she'd made in class for Hero Day. "I told them my dad's the best kind of hero," Sophie said, swinging their hands. "The kind who fixes stuff. Not just machines, but people too. Jake chuckled. That's a pretty high bar, kiddo. You met it, she said simply. They turned the bend, and there she was. Evelyn stood beneath a tree hair-down scarf fluttering in the breeze. In her hands, she held a folded picnic blanket and a bag of muffins she'd insisted on baking herself. She waved when she saw them. Jake felt something quiet bloom in his chest, not the pounding adrenaline of CPR, not the weight of stress or doubt, but peace. Earned. Lived. Real. They greeted one another the way people do when words have long since been replaced by trust. Evelyn knelt to hug Sophie, then handed her a blueberry muffin the size of her fist. Baked from scratch, she said proudly. Sophie took a bite and nodded approvingly, cheeks full. You could open a bakery. Don't tempt me, Evelyn said, laughing. They laid the blanket down near the edge of the hill where they could see the city waking in the distance, rooftops catching light windows blinking on lives unfolding. Jake sipped his coffee and leaned back on one arm. It's strange, he said. I walk this trail almost every week, but I never stop here. Evelyn glanced at him. Why not? He shrugged. Felt like I was always running to or from something. She nodded slowly. And now Jake looked around the quiet, the piece his daughter playing with fallen leaves, her laughter bright against the morning stillness. Now, I think, maybe I've arrived. Evelyn didn't say anything. She reached for his hand. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration. Just two people sitting in the stillness of a second chance at work, at life, at love. The kind of second chance you don't chase, but receive. The kind you only recognize when you've lost something first. Back at the hotel, the change was palpable. The facilities team had a renovated workspace complete with ergonomic stations and natural lighting. The staff now wore name badges with not just their positions but a line beneath that read, Team Member, Culture Builder, Backbone. Guests noticed. Reviews improved. But more importantly, morale soared. Jake oversaw the new mentorship program pairing experienced technicians with younger hires. His evenings were spent with Sophie attending her school play, helping her build solar system models out of papier-mâché. Evelyn continued leading not from a pedestal, but from the ground. She walked the hallways daily, asked for names, listened for real answers. She cried less, but when she did, it wasn't from pain. It was from joy, fulfillment, and sometimes from disbelief that a fall on a cold morning had become the foundation of something lasting. One evening in late winter, Jake returned home to find Sophie sitting at the kitchen table writing something with intense concentration. She looked up and beamed. I'm writing a story for school, she said. It's called The Man Who Brought People Back to Life. Jake smiled, hanging up his jacket. Sounds like science fiction. She shook her head. It's not. It's about you. He froze. Because you didn't just bring her back, Sophie said softly. You brought you back. And me too. Jake sat across from her, heart full. I don't know what to say to that, he murmured. Just keep being you, she replied, simple as breath. A few weeks later, Evelyn invited Jake and Sophie to a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly renamed building annex. They thought it would be something small. It wasn't. Banners waved, staff gathered, reporters snapped photos. And then Evelyn stepped forward and pulled away the black cloth covering the new bronze plaque. The Miller Wing. Dedicated to resilience, humility, and the quiet heroes who make everything work. Jake stared at the name. His name. Tears stung his eyes. I didn't know, he whispered. Evelyn took his hand. You never asked for recognition, she said, which is exactly why you deserve it. Sophie stood beside them, holding his other hand. She looked up and whispered, Told you. Hero. As the crowd dispersed and the sunlight dipped behind the rooftops, Jake stood at the edge of the plaza, watching the name gleam in the fading light. He thought back to the morning of the park. The moment he ran. The breath he gave. The hand he held. And how it had all come back to him in ways he could never have imagined. Not just a job, Not just a second chance, but a purpose, a partnership, a life. And in that golden hour glow he finally understood. Sometimes it's not the breath you take that saves you, it's the one you give, the breath that changed everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story moved you the most? And where are you watching from? Drop us a comment below. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel for more inspiring tales like this one. Your support helps us keep bringing these moments to life. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care, be kind, and never underestimate the power of one small act.